So this is a short screencast to demonstrate the idea of cloud storage through Hurl.it, www.hurl.it. So let's discuss why would ever use cloud storage or Hurl.it. Let's pretend that you made an application, and that application used a database, a contacts database. That's all well and good for the person if you stored the information locally. For the person using the app, they could access the information locally. But what about your friends or other users who would like to tap into the same application? They can't get into your database. You can solve that problem by storing the database on the cloud. That way, you can access the database, and so can your friends. Now, we know the cloud is just a metaphor for a server. So we have to connect to a server via an address. Just like your phone has a phone number or your house has a house address, server space has an address, and of course, that's the domain. In this case, Project Leadway has rented space on a server from Hurl.it. And so the way you access that web space is through the Hurl.it website. So if you go to www.hurlit.it, you'll see that you can make two types of requests, get and post. Now the first thing you have to do is set up some user space. So you would use the drop down to select a post. And then if you see the string in front of you, it says HTTPS / / and then the domain, and then / new user, and then / whatever you want the new user to be. In this case, it's just John Doe. What that does is it reserves space on that server within the space that Project Leadway rents, and allows you to write and read from and to that space. So if you executed that post command, you would get, for instance, when you created a new user, you would get a message that says, we've created the new user, you have some space basically, but the most important thing is this password they give you. Make sure you write that down because you're going to need that password, 7189. Now that's going to be different for you, but in this case, it's 7189. So if you want to send something to that space, you would use this command. Make sure it's a post, and then you use the URL, and then your username, separated by a question mark, and then what's called a name value pair. So text equals, text is the name, and what have you learned is the value. Now notice there aren't any spaces there. The web is not kind to spaces. There are things you can do about it, but for right now, just don't put any spaces there. And what'll happen is you will write to that space that you've rented on the server something called a JSON object. But if you look at it, it's just a name value pair, a string, what you have learned, because that's what you sent, and values, because you don't have any values yet. It's just 0. Um, you can also use a GET request. Notice that the dropdown says GET now. And so you're using a GET request to ask Hurl.it to go to that address, and that's csapipltw.org, and the user John Doe, and that is actually just asking to get everything that's there. And so what you'll get back is that JSON object, that JavaScript object notation. I wouldn't worry too much about that right now, but you can see that you get back what's stored there. You can also change the value because it's coordinated. So the string, the first string, what have you learned, is at index 0. Well, you know what? There's a slight error here. Most arrays or most lists like this start at 0. And when I made up this video, I used that convention. But I realized right now that Hurl.it, they start their counting at 1. So what that means is the string, what have you learned, is actually string 1. The next one would be string 2. The next one would be string 3. Conventionally, and maybe a lot of you know this, when you have lists or arrays, they usually start at 0. And so I got caught off guard and made it 1. But see where it says increment ID equals 0 up there in the post string? What it should have said is increment ID equals 1 because it starts the counting at 1. And what that's going to do, if you look right now, you'll see the values has gone from 0 to 1. And that's actually value number one, not value number zero, like I assumed it might be. So anyway, you get back a string that says result strings, and then you see the values have a 1. Now, if you want to reset everything, you would use this command, post, with the domain csapipltw.org, and then the username, John Doe, and then reset with the password. Now, you know that this is not my password. I showed it to you earlier. It wasn't 9999, but just for demonstration purposes, you send them the password. If it's correct, if the password is correct and it matches the username, all of the information there on Hurl.it will be erased or cleared. So that's an introduction. It's a quick introduction to Hurl.it, and it shows you that you can write and read and clear information on that server space so that you could use that knowledge to write an application that would send and receive data from the cloud, which is nothing but a server, so that all users of your application could share data. You need to know that piece in Activity 1.2.2 and 1.2.5. So that's just a quick introduction. I hope it had some value for you.